The wind cut through the streets of Seattle like a sharp blade, carrying with it the bitter tang of rain and exhaust. It was Christmas Eve, yet the city seemed more gray than festive, commuters hustling past with heads down, hands stuffed in pockets, umbrellas shielding their faces. Among the hurried steps and clattering bus wheels, a lone figure huddled against the wall of the downtown bus station. Her jacket, once military green but now faded and frayed at the cuffs, was pulled tightly around her shoulders. She had an aura of quiet endurance, as if she had been there before, waiting, unnoticed, for years. Teenagers with cheap holiday enthusiasm laughed and shoved one another, their voices sharp and cruel. One of them spotted her sitting quietly on the cold concrete bench. "Hey, homeless lady," a boy sneered, throwing a crumpled candy wrapper at her feet. The wrapper bounced harmlessly on her worn boots. She did not flinch. Another voice joined, high and mocking. "Look at her, probably hasn't showered in weeks." The group laughed. Most passers-by hurried past without a glance, pretending the scene didn't exist. But someone did notice. Marcus Hale, a retired Navy SEAL in his late 40s, walked past the station entrance, a coffee cup warming his hands. He had seen enough to recognize courage when he saw it, even if it was cloaked in tattered clothing. His eyes caught something subtle on the woman's sleeve. A patch. Faded, almost lost in the wrinkles of the fabric, it depicted a small emblem he had once seen during a classified operation. He stopped mid-step, taking a slow, careful sip of his coffee, and studied her without alerting the teenagers. There was something in her posture, the subtle way she sat upright, scanning the entrances and exits without moving her head, the slight tension in her shoulders that screamed discipline. Not desperation, not hopelessness. Discipline. Marcus's training kicked in immediately. He had served long enough to recognize the body language of someone who had faced life-and-death situations, who had been through hell and come out alive, and yet here she was, ignored by the world. The teenagers continued their teasing, unaware of Marcus's scrutiny. "She's just a bum," one of them said. "Bet she's got no clue it's Christmas." The boy's friend snickered. Marcus shook his head slightly, taking another sip of coffee. No, she was not a bum. He had seen this look before, quiet, controlled, unyielding. The patch on her sleeve confirmed it. Only someone with direct involvement in a dangerous, classified mission would wear such a symbol, and even fewer would dare to display it publicly. Marcus approached, keeping his voice calm, steady, and authoritative. "Excuse me," he said to the teenagers, who paused at the unexpected interruption. "Back off, all right." His tone carried the weight of someone used to command and respect. The teenagers muttered excuses and slunk away, the air of mockery dissipating like smoke. Marcus knelt slightly to match her eye level, careful not to appear threatening. She looked at him cautiously, her eyes wary but alert. There was a faint trace of surprise, almost imperceptible, as if she hadn't expected anyone to approach her with respect rather than ridicule. Marcus noticed the tiny shift in her expression. He tilted his head toward the patch. "That emblem on your jacket, I've seen it before. Where did you get it?" For a moment she said nothing. Silence stretched between them, filled with the low hum of buses, footsteps, and the occasional honk of distant traffic. Her gaze flicked toward the teenagers now retreating down the sidewalk, and then back to Marcus. Her lips pressed into a thin line, revealing nothing. Marcus understood immediately. She was trained to minimize, trained to reveal only what she chose. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet, almost melodic despite the gravel of the city streets. "It's just a patch," she said, but there was a firmness beneath the words that hinted at hidden weight, hidden significance. Marcus offered a small smile, his tone gentle but insistent. "It's more than just a patch. That patch tells a story, one that doesn't belong on a wall, doesn't belong forgotten on a cold street. You shouldn't be sitting out here alone tonight." She hesitated, scanning the crowd, the cold creeping into her bones. The frayed jacket did little to keep out the wind, and she had been sitting there for hours, unnoticed, unacknowledged. Yet she was stubborn, proud, unwilling to yield even to kindness too obvious. Marcus extended a hand not in the way of charity but in the way of a man acknowledging another warrior. "Come inside, warm up, Drink something hot. It's Christmas Eve. You deserve more than this." The woman looked at his hand, then down at the jacket she had wrapped so tightly around herself. She weighed her pride against exhaustion, hesitation against trust. Slowly, cautiously, she stood, allowing Marcus to guide her inside the bus terminal. The warmth of the building enveloped her like a soft blanket, a contrast to the harsh wind outside. For the first time in years, someone had recognized her for who she was, not what she appeared to be. As they walked past hurried travelers and festive advertisements for holiday sales, Marcus kept his gaze on her, careful not to pressure, careful to respect the quiet dignity she carried. The patch on her jacket, faded, overlooked, yet unmistakable, seemed to glow in the warm light, a silent testimony to courage, to missions accomplished in the shadows, and to sacrifices no one else would ever know. She finally spoke, her voice steady but low. I'm Evelyn, just one name. It carried all the weight of someone who had lived 1,000 hidden stories, yet none had been told aloud. Marcus nodded, acknowledging her, and said, "Evelyn, it's good to meet you. I've been looking for people like you for years." Her eyes widened, a flicker of surprise crossing her otherwise composed face. Marcus didn't elaborate yet. He let her absorb the moment. Outside, the cold wind howled, indifferent to human drama, but inside, in the warmth of the terminal, the first connection of a remarkable Christmas Eve had been made. Evelyn Brooks, once invisible to the world, had been noticed. And Marcus Hale, a retired SEAL, knew instinctively that the story behind that patch was far greater than anything anyone could imagine. She didn't speak again for the moment, simply allowing herself to walk beside him, letting the warmth seep into her bones. She hadn't trusted anyone in years, not with her past, not with her secrets. And yet here, on a crowded bus station Christmas Eve, among hurried strangers, a retired Navy SEAL had stopped, had seen, and had acknowledged. It was only the beginning. The bus terminal hummed with a quiet chaos. Travelers shuffled in and out, dragging luggage behind them, while automated announcements echoed overhead. The scent of stale coffee mixed with the sharp tang of winter rain seeping through the open doors. Evelyn Brooks followed Marcus silently, each step deliberate, her boots tapping lightly against the worn tile floor. She was cautious, wary, scanning exits and the crowd instinctively, but she stayed close, understanding that his presence was protective, not intrusive. Marcus guided her to a corner near a small, dimly lit cafe inside the terminal. The smell of fresh pastries and brewed coffee offered an almost unnatural comfort compared to the freezing streets outside. He gestured toward a pair of chairs. "Sit," he said. "Drink something warm. You can't keep standing out there in this cold, not tonight." Evelyn hesitated, glancing down at her hands tucked into the sleeves of her jacket. I don't need," she began, but Marcus interrupted gently. "This isn't about need, it's about respect," he said firmly. His eyes held the calm authority of someone used to facing life-and-death decisions. "You've been standing out there, waiting, ignored, while everyone else rushes past. That patch on your jacket, it tells me there's more to you than they'll ever understand." Evelyn's gaze flickered toward the patch again. The emblem was faded, the edges frayed from years of wear, but the design was unmistakable to anyone trained to recognize it. A tiny, intricate symbol of a mission few had survived and even fewer had witnessed. She pressed her lips together, not out of anger but to keep control. Words, especially about her past, were dangerous. They could unravel everything. Yet Marcus didn't push, didn't demand, simply acknowledged the existence of something she had hidden for years. Slowly, reluctantly, she lowered herself into the chair. The movement was smooth, disciplined, betraying years of military training. Marcus watched her quietly, noting the subtle stiffness in her shoulders, the way she held her back straight, alert even in rest. He recognized the signs instantly: trauma, yes, but also readiness. She had survived situations most civilians couldn't comprehend. Her body remembered danger even if her mind tried to rest. He ordered 2 coffees, one for himself and one for her, letting the warmth of the cup seep into his fingers before sliding hers across the table. She took it with a slight nod, holding it like a lifeline. Marcus waited patiently, giving her space, allowing the quiet to stretch between them. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but controlled. "I'm Evelyn," she said, just a single name, but it carried weight. It was a defense mechanism as much as an introduction. She revealed only what was safe. Marcus nodded respectfully. "Evelyn, good to meet you. I'm Marcus. I noticed your patch." Her eyes narrowed slightly, cautious but not hostile. "It's nothing," she said. Yet her fingers brushed over the fabric subconsciously, a subconscious acknowledgement that it was far from nothing. Marcus leaned back slightly, allowing her to feel safe, letting the conversation flow on her terms. "Nothing," Marcus echoed gently. "That patch represents something incredible. I've seen it before during a mission that only a handful of people even knew existed. I can tell by your posture, your eyes, you've been through hell and somehow you survived it. And yet you sit here, invisible to everyone else." Evelyn's eyes flicked toward the floor. She had learned long ago that people didn't want to hear the truth, didn't want to acknowledge someone who had seen horrors beyond imagination. Her missions, her survival, her scars, all invisible to the outside world. She sipped her coffee, the warmth traveling down her chest, the caffeine a temporary comfort against years of isolation. "I didn't ask to be noticed," she said softly. "Not anymore. Not after." Her voice trailed off, deliberately incomplete. The weight of her past hung in the air. Marcus sensed the pause, the invisible barrier she had constructed, a fortress built from years of danger, secrecy, and pain. "Noted," Marcus said gently, leaning forward. "You don't have to tell me everything right now, but I want you to know I see you. Not what people think, not what they call you. I see the real you." Her eyes met his for the first time fully, and Marcus caught the faintest trace of surprise. She wasn't used to recognition without judgment, to acknowledgement without pity. Her training had taught her to rely on herself, trust few, and hide much. Yet here, someone who had faced life-and-death decisions, someone who could recognize the meaning behind a faded patch, treated her as an equal. The teenagers who had mocked her earlier were long gone, swept back into the chaotic city streets. Outside, the wind still howled, indifferent to human suffering. Inside, the terminal felt almost like a sanctuary. Marcus studied her subtly, the way her hands curled slightly around the coffee cup, the faint tension in her jaw, the way her eyes flicked toward exits even as she tried to relax. Every detail told him a story, a life of discipline, danger, and isolation. Do you really know what that patch means?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I do," Marcus replied, "and I want you to know it's not forgotten, not by me, not by anyone who ever saw what you did." A flicker of emotion passed through Evelyn's eyes, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Relief, pride, perhaps a combination of both. She sipped her coffee, the warmth spreading, and for the first time let herself be present without the shield of indifference. Marcus shifted slightly, choosing his words carefully. "Evelyn, it doesn't matter that the rest of the world ignores you. What matters is that someone remembers, someone sees your courage, and tonight that's enough to start." Evelyn's lips pressed together. She wanted to disagree, to retreat, to hide. Yet something about Marcus's calm, unwavering gaze made it impossible. She had spent so many Christmas Eves alone, cold, unnoticed, and unappreciated. Here, in the flickering fluorescent light of a bus terminal, a stranger had acknowledged her worth, and for the first time in years it felt almost safe. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows, wind whipping around corners of the city. Inside, the terminal hummed with the muffled sounds of humanity, footsteps, announcements, quiet chatter. Evelyn sat a little straighter, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Marcus didn't rush her. He understood that trust, once broken or denied for years, could not be forced. "I've been out of touch," she admitted finally, a small crack in her carefully constructed armor. "With people, with everything." Then let's start simple, Marcus said gently. A warm drink, a safe place to sit, and a conversation at your pace, that's all tonight. Evelyn allowed herself a small nod, the faintest acknowledgement that she would accept the connection, even if only temporarily. The patch on her jacket, once overlooked and mocked outside, glimmered faintly in the indoor light. It was more than a symbol, it was proof that someone had survived, had fought, had sacrificed, and had not been forgotten. Marcus watched her for a moment longer, silently promising himself he would protect that story, at least for tonight. Outside, the city rushed past in indifference. Inside, a retired SEAL and a hidden hero began a conversation that would slowly peel away years of silence, isolation, and unspoken sacrifice. And on that cold Christmas Eve, in the heart of a busy city that cared little for its own, Evelyn Brooks allowed herself ever so slightly to be seen. The bus terminal was quieter now, the crowd thinning as evening fell. Neon lights from nearby shops flickered against the rain-streaked windows, casting streaks of color across the floor. Evelyn Brooks sat across from Marcus Hale, her coffee steaming gently in her hands. She seemed smaller in the dim light, but her posture remained rigid, shoulders squared, eyes constantly scanning the terminal as though ready for any threat. Every movement was calculated, precise, a remnant of countless hours spent in high-stakes situations. Marcus watched her carefully. The patch on her sleeve had caught his attention, but there was more than that: the way she held herself, the controlled way she breathed, the subtle tension in her body. Anyone could see a tired woman huddled for warmth, but he saw a soldier, a survivor, someone who had faced situations most people could only imagine. "I know you don't talk about your past," Marcus said softly, "but I can tell it's complicated." Evelyn's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. She didn't look at him, instead staring at the tiny ripples of steam. "Complicated is one word for it," she said. Her voice was calm, but beneath it, Marcus sensed layers of pain and unspoken memories. She had learned long ago that words were dangerous. Words revealed weakness. Words invited questions no one had answers for. Marcus leaned forward slightly, careful not to push. "I served," he said, letting the statement float between them. "I've seen things that, well, things most civilians can't understand. And I've learned that people like us, we notice details others ignore." Evelyn glanced at him briefly, a flicker of recognition passing through her eyes. It wasn't curiosity exactly, more like a careful calculation testing if he truly understood what he was implying. Marcus followed her gaze, noticing the subtle scar on her right forearm, the faint limp in her left shoulder, the way her fingers flexed like she was ready to move at a moment's notice. Every detail confirmed his initial suspicion. Evelyn was not an ordinary civilian. She was someone trained to survive. "You notice a lot," she said finally, her tone tinged with dry humor. "You're good at noticing things people don't want you to." Marcus smiled faintly. "It's what we do. I noticed the patch first, but it's the small things that tell the real story. The way you sit, the way you watch exits. You've been in situations where every second mattered and every movement could mean life or death." Evelyn's eyes flicked to the patch again. It had been her silent companion for years, a reminder of a life that most people would never understand. It represented a Christmas Eve mission long classified, one that had left scars on her body and soul. She had survived, yes, but at great cost. Most of her team had been recognized publicly, their heroism celebrated. She had been left in the shadows, her role erased from the history books. "I don't like to talk about it," she admitted quietly. "Not because it's shameful, not because I'm hiding, it doesn't matter, not anymore." Marcus nodded, understanding the layers behind her words. "It does matter," he said gently. "It matters to people who know, people who understand what it took for you to survive, even if the world doesn't know. I do, and that counts." Evelyn studied him for a long moment. She had been alone for so long, navigating the world with invisible scars and unacknowledged courage. People had dismissed her, mocked her, ignored her. And now, sitting here in a crowded bus terminal, she was being seen, truly seen, by someone who recognized the weight she carried. "You don't understand," she said finally, her voice low but firm. "The things I've done, the things I've seen, they're not for anyone else. I made choices that they don't forgive. They never will." Marcus leaned back, letting her words sink into the space between them. "You made choices in impossible situations," he said quietly. "Choices that saved lives, choices most people couldn't even imagine making. Forgiveness isn't always what we need. Recognition, acknowledgement, that's a start." Her eyes flickered with emotion, something she rarely allowed herself to feel publicly. There was pride, yes, but also exhaustion. She had carried the weight of her past alone for so long that even the idea of sharing it, even partially, was almost unbearable. And yet, Marcus wasn't pressing. He was giving her the space to reveal herself on her own terms, something she hadn't experienced in years. "The patch," she began, her voice hesitant. "It's not just a patch, it's a reminder of what I did, of what I lost, and of who I had to become to survive." Marcus nodded. "I can see that, and I respect it, but you don't have to carry it alone anymore. Not tonight, not while I'm here." For the first time in years, Evelyn allowed herself a small, tentative smile. Not a full smile, she wasn't ready for that, but a gesture of acknowledgement, of trust. It was a fragile thing, easily broken, but it existed. Outside, the wind howled and the rain continued to fall, but inside the terminal, a small bubble of warmth and understanding had formed. Two people, both shaped by a world of danger and secrecy, had found each other in a city that often ignored the extraordinary. Evelyn sipped her coffee again, letting the warmth seep into her bones. Marcus watched her silently, noting the subtle relaxation in her shoulders, the small exhale of tension she hadn't realized she was holding. It was progress, small but real. "I don't know if I can ever go back," she said quietly, almost to herself. "To normal life, to being seen." "You don't have to go back," Marcus replied gently. "You just have to start forward, one step, one night, one conversation. That's how you begin again." Evelyn's eyes met his again, longer this time. There was a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself in years, hope, a fragile, trembling ember, but real nonetheless. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Marcus understood. For the rest of the evening, they sat together, talking quietly, sharing fragments of their pasts without ever revealing everything. She spoke in hints, in subtle gestures, in small admissions that left Marcus piecing together a life most would never imagine. He respected her boundaries, never pushing, never judging. And slowly, the silence between words became comfortable, a shared understanding that didn't require explanation. As the buses continued to roll in and out, and travelers rushed past unaware of the quiet drama unfolding in a corner of the terminal, Evelyn allowed herself to relax just a little. She wasn't invisible tonight. Someone saw her. Someone acknowledged the weight of her past, the sacrifices she had made, and the courage that had carried her through darkness. Marcus took another sip of coffee, watching her with quiet admiration. The patch on her sleeve gleamed faintly in the warm terminal light, a symbol of courage, of hidden heroism, and of a life lived on the edge. Evelyn Brooks, once unseen and dismissed, was beginning to emerge from the shadows. And tonight, in the glow of a crowded bus station on Christmas Eve, the first threads of recognition, trust, and perhaps even redemption were quietly woven between two people who understood each other in ways no one else could. Outside, the rain continued its relentless fall, indifferent to human drama. Inside, a retired SEAL and a hidden hero began the slow process of connection, trust, and acknowledgement. The first chapter of Evelyn's return to the world had begun. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. The terminal's lights flickered faintly as buses rumbled past outside, their headlights cutting through the rain-slick streets. Evelyn Brooks sat back in her chair, the warm mug of coffee now only partially touched, her hands wrapped loosely around it. For the first time since meeting Marcus Hale, she allowed herself a small, contemplative silence. She had spent years avoiding words, keeping her past locked away. But something about Marcus, the way he saw her without judgment, the way he recognized the patch, made her reconsider. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet but precise, controlled as always. "That patch, it's from a mission," she said, letting the words hang in the air. "Not just any mission, a Christmas Eve mission, years ago." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his expression calm but intent, sensing the gravity behind her words. "I thought as much," he said softly. "You weren't just anyone wearing that patch. I've seen it before. Only a select few were involved." Evelyn took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had told almost no one. A single sentence about this mission could change how the world saw her, and she wasn't ready for fame or recognition. She had spent her life in the shadows after that night, invisible to everyone who mattered, carrying scars that no medal or ceremony could ever honor. But tonight, she felt a strange, cautious trust. "I was the only operative on the ground," she said finally, her voice low but firm. "The mission was supposed to be a rescue, civilians trapped after a plane went down in hostile territory. The others, they were supposed to support me, but complications arose. It ended up being just me." Her hands flexed unconsciously, fingers tightening around the mug. Marcus noticed, reading the tension like a map of past trauma. "You went in alone?" Marcus asked, awe and concern mixing in his tone. Evelyn nodded. "It wasn't planned. I had to improvise, evacuate them without backup. The enemy was closing in and there was no time for hesitation. Every move counted. Every second could mean life or death." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Some of the team survived in theory, but they weren't there. And the civilians, I had to make sure they lived." Marcus didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. He could almost see the night unfold before him, a hostile, snow-covered landscape, civilians trapped and terrified, a lone operative moving with precision and courage. It was the kind of scenario that broke ordinary people, yet Evelyn had survived. Her composure, her calculated calm, the silent strength that radiated from her even now, it was all proof of the impossible things she had endured. "I was wounded," she continued, voice steady but low, "and the injuries didn't just heal physically. Every choice I made, every second I lived through, it left a mark." She glanced down at the patch again, tracing its outline. "This patch isn't just a symbol, it's proof. Proof that I survived something no one else knew, that I carried people to safety when everything else was falling apart." Marcus nodded slowly. He had known the mission was high risk, but hearing it in her words brought it alive. "No one else knew," he said. "No recognition." Evelyn shook her head. "The public awards went to others. Only a few in classified positions knew the truth. My part was secret. I didn't want recognition anyway. I wanted them safe, and that's all that mattered." Her voice carried the calm finality of someone who had made peace with her role, yet Marcus sensed the undercurrent of isolation. Outside, rain pelted the windows in relentless sheets, drumming against the terminal with a rhythmic insistence. Inside, the warmth and quiet allowed her story to unfold. Marcus listened intently, aware of the unspoken details, the sacrifices, the fear, the discipline that had kept her alive. "You carried everyone," he said quietly. "Alone, and you're still here. That's extraordinary." Evelyn's eyes flickered with a mixture of pride and pain. "It wasn't extraordinary. It was survival. It was duty. I don't think in terms of heroism. I think in terms of getting the job done, protecting people, completing the mission." She took another sip of coffee, letting the warmth steady her nerves. Marcus studied her carefully. The calm, almost clinical description of danger didn't mask the emotion beneath. Her slight flinch when she mentioned being wounded, the brief catch in her breath, it all revealed that the mission had left scars she carried daily. The patch on her sleeve, once overlooked by the world, now represented far more than anyone could know: courage, trauma, and a lifetime of silent sacrifice. "I can't imagine being alone out there," Marcus said quietly. "Facing everything without backup, knowing every decision could mean life or death." Evelyn shrugged slightly, almost dismissively, but Marcus caught the truth behind the gesture. "You can imagine," she said finally, "because you've been there in your own way. You've faced impossible choices, and you know the weight of them." She sipped her coffee again, the steam curling around her face. For a moment she allowed herself to breathe, to rest in a rare moment of understanding. Marcus didn't push further. He simply listened, a silent acknowledgement that she could speak as much or as little as she wanted. That alone was enough to make her feel seen. "You saved them," Marcus said gently, "every single one, and that patch, it proves it. You weren't just part of the team, you were the team." Evelyn's gaze shifted to him, eyes widening slightly. "I wasn't supposed to do it alone, but circumstances forced it, and I didn't fail, not once. But the cost, it wasn't just physical, it's everything else I carry now." Marcus nodded, silently absorbing the weight of her words. He had known danger, had known loss, but there was something uniquely harrowing about a solo mission of this scale. Her composure, her calm, her ability to survive under impossible circumstances, it all spoke of extraordinary skill, bravery, and endurance. For the first time, Evelyn allowed herself a flicker of vulnerability, a subtle crack in the armor she had built over years of secrecy. She glanced at Marcus, and for a moment, he saw her not as a mysterious figure on a bus station bench, but as a woman who had faced death, fear, and impossible odds, and had survived. "And tonight," she said quietly, almost to herself, "I sit here, cold and ignored by the world, and wonder if any of it mattered." Marcus reached across the table, placing a hand lightly near hers. "It mattered," he said, his voice firm and sincere. "It mattered to every life you saved, and tonight it matters to me. You're seen now, Evelyn, not as the world ignores you, but as the person you truly are." Her eyes met his, a mixture of surprise, caution, and a flicker of gratitude passing across her face. For the first time in years, someone outside her memories of missions and shadows acknowledged her courage, without judgment, without expectation, simply seeing her for who she was. The patch gleamed faintly in the warm light of the terminal, a small emblem of a mission the world had never known, yet it now carried meaning beyond secret operations. It was proof, yes, proof of survival, of courage, of a life lived in extremes. And most importantly, it was the beginning of acknowledgement she had been denied for far too long. Outside, the rain continued to fall, relentless and indifferent. Inside, the terminal had become a refuge of understanding, warmth, and recognition. Evelyn Brooks, once dismissed, once invisible, had begun the slow process of being seen, truly seen. And in that recognition, there was a small, fragile spark of relief, hope, and trust. Tonight, the Christmas Eve patch was no longer just cloth. It was a testament, a story, a lifeline, a reminder that bravery, even in secrecy, mattered. And for the first time in years, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that perhaps someone, just one person, finally understood. Evelyn Brooks sat in the corner of the bus terminal, watching people move past, their faces a blur of holiday cheer and urgency. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the city remained indifferent to her presence. She cradled the fatting warmth of her coffee cup in her hands, and though her jacket shielded her from the chill, it could not protect her from memories. The patch on her sleeve was more than cloth. It was a relic of a life she had long abandoned, a symbol of heroism unacknowledged and sacrifices unseen. After the Christmas Eve mission, Evelyn returned home to a world that had moved on without her. The plane crash had been reported, but her actions had been classified, erased from public records. The medals and awards went to others, visible, celebrated, while her name remained absent. She tried to contact colleagues, sought guidance, but every record she touched was sealed behind bureaucratic walls. She had survived, yes, but only to face an invisible battlefield at home. Her body bore the scars. A shoulder injury lingered, constant reminders of near-death struggles, forced landings, and firefights. Nights were haunted by flashbacks, smoke, screams, falling debris. Evelyn often woke in the dark, her body taut, heart racing, training her to respond even in the safety of her apartment. She had learned to sleep lightly, to expect danger everywhere, even when none existed. It was a skill that had saved her life overseas, but at home it became a chain. Financial stability was elusive. She had left military service abruptly, her records complicated, her experience too classified to translate easily into civilian jobs. Offers came, yes, but once she mentioned her limitations, they vanished. She had tried to explain in vague terms, citing confidential contracts and sensitive missions, but employers recoiled at the ambiguity. It was a life lived in shadows, capable, trained, intelligent, yet unseen, undervalued, and isolated. Christmas Eves had become the hardest nights. The world celebrated cheer, family, and warmth, yet she had little connection to any of it. She would walk the streets or sit quietly in bus terminals, cafes, or libraries, allowing herself only fleeting glimpses of life outside her own bubble of secrecy. The patch on her jacket was a constant companion, a silent acknowledgement of what she had done, who she had saved, and the sacrifices that no one would ever know. She didn't wear it for attention. She wore it for memory, for her own survival, and for the honor of those who had not returned. Marcus listened as Evelyn spoke in fragments, careful not to overshare, revealing only the edges of her life. "I tried to find purpose," she said, her voice low, almost trembling. "I volunteered sometimes, worked odd jobs, but the memories always followed. Every loud noise, every sudden movement, I felt like I was back there. And then I realized people don't want to hear it. They don't want to see what it costs to save lives they don't even know about." Marcus nodded. He understood the weight of unseen heroism. "You're not invisible," he said firmly. "Not to me. And tonight, maybe for the first time, you won't be invisible." Evelyn gave a small, tentative smile, one she hadn't allowed herself in years. She had been taught to rely on no one, to trust only herself. Relationships, friendships, even family connections had frayed over time because she had been unable to share her experiences. She had learned that people feared what they could not understand, and that her own silence was safer than explanations. Yet Marcus's calm recognition felt different, no judgment, no awe, no pity, just acknowledgement. Her past, however, was never far from her present. Nights of solitude were filled with reflection. She replayed missions in her mind, imagining outcomes, questioning choices. Every operation she had undertaken, every calculated risk, every moment of bravery was scrutinized endlessly in the private theater of her thoughts. Some nights, she allowed herself to feel pride. Other nights, guilt and regret gnawed at her. The civilians she had saved, the teammates who had survived and perished, their faces were etched into her memory. She carried them everywhere. "Did it ever get easier?" Marcus asked softly, his eyes meeting hers. "Living after it?" Evelyn shook her head slowly. "No," she admitted. "You survive out there because you have to, but here in the normal world you're invisible. People can't see the battles you fought, they don't understand the choices you made, and they don't want to." She paused, her gaze dropping to the patch. "That's why I wear this, not for anyone else, only for me. It reminds me I mattered, that I did something no one else could." Marcus reached across the table, not touching her but signaling connection. "It matters," he said gently. "Every choice, every life saved, every risk you took. And now it matters to me too. You're not alone in carrying it anymore." Evelyn's eyes glistened, a fragile emotion breaking through her practiced composure. She had spent years perfecting the art of invisibility, blending into crowds, allowing herself to be overlooked. It had been a survival tactic, one that had saved her life countless times. But tonight with Marcus, the burden felt lighter, not gone, but shared, acknowledged. She recounted fragments of her attempts to integrate back into civilian life. Jobs had come and gone, some ending because of misunderstandings, others because she refused to compromise her privacy. She had volunteered at shelters, helped veterans quietly, offered aid without recognition. Her life was a series of small, often unnoticed acts, gestures of service that carried the weight of her experiences, even if no one ever knew. Christmas, in particular, was a cruel reminder of her solitude. Families celebrated, streets glimmered with lights, and music filled the air. Evelyn walked among the cheerful crowds, invisible, unnoticed, except for those fleeting moments when someone like Marcus saw her for what she truly was. That recognition was rare, almost miraculous, and yet profoundly transformative. "I've carried it all alone for so long," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the terminal's hum. "The memories, the guilt, the pain, the isolation. And it never ends. It just waits like a shadow, watching, reminding me that the world moved on while I stayed behind." Marcus nodded, understanding the depth of her confession. "It's heavy," he said softly, "but you don't have to carry it alone. Not anymore. That patch, it's not just a memory, it's proof. Proof that someone survived, someone made a difference. And tonight that proof matters to me. To the world eventually, but at least to someone who understands." Evelyn glanced at him, her eyes flickering with something she had long denied herself: hope. It was fragile, tentative, but unmistakable. For the first time in years, she realized that she didn't have to remain invisible. She could be acknowledged, even if only privately, for her sacrifices. And for tonight, that was enough. She sipped her coffee again, letting the warmth spread through her body. Outside, the city buzzed with holiday activity, but inside, time seemed suspended. Two people, both shaped by invisible battles and unspoken sacrifices, sat together, sharing a rare moment of understanding. "I don't know if I can ever go back to normal life," she admitted quietly. "Maybe I'm not meant to." Marcus smiled faintly. "Then don't go back, move forward at your pace, one step at a time. You've survived the impossible. This is just the next mission, one that matters for your life, not just others." Evelyn Brooks allowed herself a small nod, a gesture of acceptance, however tentative. For the first time, the weight she carried felt a little lighter. The patch on her sleeve glimmered softly in the warm light, a silent testament to courage, endurance, and survival. And for the first time in years, she felt recognized, not by medals or public accolades, but by a single person who truly understood. Outside, the night deepened, and the rain continued its steady rhythm. Inside, a quiet transformation unfolded. Evelyn, once invisible and dismissed, began to reclaim her sense of purpose. She was no longer alone in carrying the past, and the possibility of connection, of trust, recognition, and even hope began to flicker in her heart like a small, steady flame. Tonight, the Christmas Eve patch was more than a relic. It was proof of survival, of heroism, and of a life that mattered. And for Evelyn Brooks, it was the first step toward being seen again. The terminal was quieter now. The rush of holiday travelers slowed as the evening deepened. The scent of coffee lingered in the air, mixed with the faint undertone of wet coats and damp umbrellas. Evelyn Brooks sat in her corner, her gaze occasionally drifting toward the bustling entrances and exits. The patch on her jacket caught the soft glow of the overhead lights, a small emblem of bravery unnoticed by everyone except her. Marcus Hale observed her from across the table, his coffee untouched for several minutes. He had spent hours listening, learning, quietly validating her life and her sacrifices. Now he felt it was time to act, to move beyond conversation. Evelyn needed acknowledgement, not from strangers who mocked her, not from a world indifferent to hidden heroism, but from someone who could help her begin reclaiming her life. "Evelyn," Marcus said finally, leaning forward, "tonight doesn't have to end here." His voice was calm, confident, yet gentle. "You've been invisible for too long. It's time people started seeing you." She tilted her head slightly, suspicion flickering in her eyes. "Seeing me? Why would anyone care?" she asked softly, almost rhetorically. "Because they should," he replied. "Because what you've done, what you survived, it matters. Not just to me, but to anyone who values courage, sacrifice, and duty, and I can help them see it." Evelyn frowned. Recognition had always been a double-edged sword. Public acknowledgement could bring attention, questions, and complications she wasn't ready to handle. She had spent years avoiding it, mastering invisibility. Yet Marcus's calm certainty, his unwavering gaze, made her hesitate. Perhaps, just perhaps, this was different. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. I mean, Marcus said, his tone deliberate, that we start small, not fame, not headlines, but acknowledgement. You deserve to be recognized even quietly. For the lives you saved, for the courage you demonstrated, for the sacrifices no one else knows. Evelyn considered his words. She had long thought recognition unnecessary, even dangerous. Her heroism was private, confined to memory and the patch on her jacket. Yet Marcus wasn't asking for accolades, just acknowledgement. It was bearable, tangible even. A small first step toward reclaiming herself. Marcus rose and motioned toward the terminal's waiting area. There's a program for veterans, civilians who have served in classified missions. They honor contributions quietly, safely. I can introduce you. No crowds, no publicity, just people who understand. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, assessing him. The idea of being recognized made her stomach tighten, a mix of anxiety and intrigue. She had lived years in shadows, avoiding attention, avoiding questions. But the way Marcus framed it as safe, controlled, meaningful, it softened her instinct to refuse. Okay, she said finally, her voice measured but firm. But carefully, no surprises, no attention. Marcus nodded approvingly. Exactly. This isn't about being on display. It's about acknowledgement. Your story, your courage, your sacrifices, finally, they get their due. They left the terminal together, the rain now reduced to a light mist that clung to coats and umbrellas. Marcus guided her toward a waiting car, speaking quietly as they walked. It's important to reclaim parts of yourself, Evelyn. You've survived impossible odds. You deserve to be seen for that. The car ride was silent, except for the hum of the engine and the distant sounds of the city. Evelyn gazed out the window, her mind replaying scenes from the mission she had recounted. The civilians she had carried to safety, the fire that had threatened to engulf her team, the decisions made in split seconds that had determined life or death. They were memories that had haunted her. Yet now they seemed lighter, as if simply being heard by Marcus had lifted some of their weight. Arriving at the center, Marcus led her through a quiet hallway, away from any crowds. The program coordinator, a retired intelligence officer named Helen, greeted them with a warm, knowing smile. She had reviewed Evelyn's records, limited as they were, and understood the delicacy of recognition for someone in her position. Evelyn, Helen said, extending her hand, it's an honor to meet you. Marcus spoke highly of you. We've prepared something special just to acknowledge your contributions quietly. No press, no fanfare, just respect. Evelyn shook her hand cautiously, unaccustomed to such warmth directed at her personally. She had faced countless strangers, enemies, and situations where trust was a liability. This was different, safe, controlled, meaningful. They were guided into a small, intimate room where a few veterans and officials quietly waited. Each person had experienced missions and sacrifices invisible to the public, and each understood the weight of acknowledgement. Marcus stepped aside, letting Evelyn take in the room. Tonight, Helen said softly, we honor those who saved lives without recognition, who acted in the shadows for the good of others. Evelyn Brooks, your courage, skill, and sacrifices are recognized and respected. Thank you. Evelyn's eyes flickered toward the patch on her jacket, her heart tightening. For years, it had been her silent companion, her private proof of survival. Now, people were seeing it, understanding its meaning. She felt something she hadn't in a long time, acknowledgement, validation, a sense of connection to others who shared her experience. Marcus gave her a small nod from across the room, silently affirming her bravery and endurance. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was fleeting, fragile, but real. After the quiet ceremony, Marcus and Evelyn stepped outside into the cool night air. The city streets glimmered with holiday lights, reflections dancing on wet pavement. Evelyn felt lighter, the weight of isolation easing slightly. Recognition, even quiet recognition, had a power she had underestimated. Thank you, she said softly to Marcus, her voice carrying a rare vulnerability. I didn't think it mattered anymore. It does, Marcus replied firmly. Every life you saved, every sacrifice you made, it all matters. And now, at least, it matters to people who understand. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt a sense of belonging, of connection beyond the memories and shadows that had dominated her life. The patch on her jacket gleamed faintly in the streetlights, no longer just a relic of a mission, but a symbol of courage, endurance, and recognition. As they walked through the quiet streets, Evelyn realized something profound. Survival had been her focus for so long, but acknowledgement, understanding, validation, and trust was a gift she had denied herself. Tonight, with Marcus's guidance, she had begun reclaiming that gift. The city remained indifferent, bustling with life, unaware of the small, intimate victories happening in its streets. But Evelyn Brooks, once invisible and dismissed, was slowly emerging from the shadows. She had been seen, quietly, safely, meaningfully. And in that recognition, a spark of hope began to grow, fragile but undeniable. Marcus glanced at her, noting the slight relaxation in her shoulders, the small signs of relief in her expression. "You're not invisible anymore," he said softly. "Not to me and not tonight." Evelyn allowed herself to breathe, truly breathe, for the first time in years. The Christmas Eve patch on her jacket wasn't just a memory now. It was a symbol of survival, courage, and the beginning of recognition. And for the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt that maybe, just maybe, she could step back into the world without fear, without shame, and without invisibility. The morning sun slanted through the bus terminal's large windows, casting long, golden stripes across the worn tile floor. Evelyn Brooks sat quietly on a bench, her jacket zipped tightly against the crisp December air. For the first time in years, she felt a strange mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The small recognition ceremony from the previous night had been a breakthrough, but the real test lay ahead, facing a world that had long ignored her. Marcus Hale arrived with a travel mug of coffee, setting it gently beside her. "Morning," he said with a faint smile. "Ready for today." Evelyn took the mug, nodding silently. Her usual armor of composure was in place, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She had spent years moving through life unnoticed, her accomplishments invisible, her sacrifices erased. Today, she would step further into the light, cautiously but deliberately. Marcus continued, his voice calm and reassuring. "You're not alone. We'll move at your pace. Today isn't about spectacle. It's about acknowledgement. It's about you reclaiming your story." Evelyn's gaze shifted toward the small group waiting outside the terminal: journalists, colleagues from veterans programs, and a few retired officers. Their faces reflected curiosity, some skepticism, and a faint trace of admiration. She knew the patch on her sleeve would attract questions. The emblem she had worn for years, a symbol of her Christmas Eve mission, was recognizable to anyone who knew the secret, but it also drew doubt from those who didn't. "Doubt doesn't matter," Marcus whispered. "You know the truth, that's all that counts." Evelyn nodded again, taking a deep breath. Her life had been defined by impossible missions and silent victories. Public scrutiny was unfamiliar territory, but she reminded herself that truth had power, even if the world resisted acknowledging it. The first interaction came from a young reporter, notebook in hand, eyes wide with curiosity. "Ms. Brooks," she began hesitantly, "can you tell us about the mission you were involved in, the Christmas Eve operation?" Evelyn's jaw tightened slightly, but she responded with calm precision. "I was tasked with evacuating civilians in a high-risk environment. It was classified, and I can only discuss limited details publicly. My focus was on saving lives, and that's what I did." The reporter scribbled quickly, nodding. "Some people question the accuracy of accounts involving a single operative. How do you respond?" Evelyn's eyes flickered with controlled intensity. "I respond with facts. What I did saved lives. That is indisputable. The rest is speculation." Marcus stepped subtly to her side, a reassuring presence without intrusion. Evelyn had learned long ago to rely on herself, Yet the quiet support reminded her that trust and partnership could exist outside combat zones. She straightened her posture, her presence commanding despite years of invisibility. The small crowd murmured. Some nodded in understanding, others glanced at one another uncertain. The patch on her sleeve caught the light, its worn edges a testament to countless dangers survived. To skeptics, it might have seemed like a mere emblem. To those trained to recognize it, it was proof of courage, skill, and extraordinary resilience. Evelyn continued, carefully recounting her experiences in measured terms, neither exaggerating nor underplaying her role. She spoke of challenges faced, decisions made under pressure, and lives saved. Each word was deliberate, drawing attention not to herself as a hero but to the impact of her actions. "You've faced criticism from some colleagues," Marcus noted quietly after a pause. "How do you handle that?" Evelyn's lips pressed together. She had anticipated skepticism. It was a constant companion in her post-mission life. "Criticism is inevitable," she said softly. "People react to what they understand, and most people don't understand this work. My responsibility is to the truth, to the lives saved, and to my own integrity. The rest is noise." Her words resonated. Among the group, eyes widened slightly, not at arrogance, but at the quiet authority in her tone. Evelyn Brooks, long dismissed and mocked, was commanding attention not through showmanship but through sheer presence and clarity. Later that day, she met with a small panel of veterans who had also operated in classified missions. They had known the stakes, the pressures, and the solitude of silent heroism. Their recognition was different, nuanced, knowing, and unspoken in many ways. "You've carried this alone for too long," one veteran remarked. "It's time you realize the impact of your actions, not just the lives you saved, but the example you set for others." Evelyn nodded, a faint smile breaking through. Recognition among peers who truly understood was far more valuable than public approval. Here, she wasn't invisible. Here, her experiences were validated, her courage acknowledged. Marcus guided her gently as they moved through the day, from interviews to private discussions, always mindful of her boundaries. Evelyn began to feel something she hadn't in years, the fragile stirrings of trust, the possibility of connection, and even hope. By evening, they returned to a quiet street near the terminal. The city lights reflected on wet asphalt, a soft glow illuminating her path. Evelyn paused, taking in the rhythm of the night, the distant chatter of holiday crowds, and the stillness that allowed her to reflect. "I didn't expect it to feel good," she admitted quietly to Marcus. "Being seen, having people believe it, even some of them." Marcus smiled. "Recognition isn't about everyone. It's about the right people noticing, understanding, and respecting what you've done. And tonight, that's exactly what happened." Evelyn looked down at the patch, tracing its faded edges. It had witnessed countless battles, carried her through fire, snow, and isolation. Now it symbolized something more, not only survival but acknowledgement. People had questioned her, doubted her, even mocked her. But she had stood firm, calm, and unyielding, and they had seen her finally. "Do you think it's enough?" she asked, her voice softer, tinged with uncertainty. Marcus shook his head slightly. "Enough is a relative term. What matters is that you're recognized and that you've reclaimed a part of yourself. The world may still doubt, but you know the truth. That's what counts." Evelyn allowed herself a deep breath. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of balance between the past and present, between the invisible missions that defined her and the recognition she had long denied herself. She realized that surviving wasn't enough. Reclaiming identity and being seen were equally vital. That night, Evelyn walked through the streets with Marcus by her side. The holiday lights reflected in her eyes, and for the first time in years, she moved with quiet confidence. The patch on her sleeve gleamed faintly in the glow, a symbol of survival, courage, and the acknowledgement she had finally begun to receive. Evelyn Brooks, once dismissed and invisible, had faced the world. She had confronted doubt, skepticism, and the lingering effects of years of isolation. And she had emerged, not only recognized by those who mattered but empowered by the realization that her actions, her sacrifices, and her courage could no longer be ignored. The Christmas Eve patch, once a hidden emblem of silent heroism, now stood as proof, not just of her past, but of her reclaimed identity. And with Marcus's support, Evelyn began the final steps toward fully embracing her place in the world, no longer invisible, no longer dismissed, but finally seen and respected for who she truly was. The first snow of winter fell softly over the city, dusting streets and rooftops with a quiet, glittering layer. Evelyn Brooks stood at the edge of a small plaza near the terminal, her jacket zipped against the chill, the Christmas Eve patch on her sleeve glinting faintly in the streetlights. The memory of the mission, the years of invisibility, the isolation and doubts, all were present, but tonight they were tempered by something she had not felt in a long time: peace. Marcus Hale arrived beside her carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He handed one to her, their fingers brushing briefly. She accepted it with a small nod, appreciating the warmth not just of the coffee, but of his unwavering presence. He had guided her through acknowledgement, recognition, and trust, standing beside her as she faced the world that had long ignored her. "Feels different, doesn't it?" Marcus said softly, watching her as the snow drifted around them. Evelyn nodded. "Yes, but also strange. All these years I thought recognition would change nothing, but it changes everything." Her voice was calm, measured, but underneath lay a rare tremor of emotion. Recognition was not about fame. It was about truth, validation, and reclaiming herself. The journey to this point had been arduous. She remembered the countless nights of solitude, the flashbacks of danger, the persistent skepticism of those who doubted her story, and the isolation that had defined her post-mission life. For years, she had survived silently, unnoticed, her heroism erased by bureaucracy, secrecy, and societal indifference. Yet tonight, she was no longer invisible. Earlier that day, a small gathering had been arranged at a private veterans center. It wasn't public, it wasn't sensationalized, but it was meaningful. Evelyn had been quietly honored, her contributions acknowledged by those who understood the stakes, the risks, and the skill required for her mission. The reactions of her peers, nods, quiet applause, knowing smiles, had carried more weight than any public accolade ever could. She had felt seen, truly seen. "Your story inspires," Marcus said, breaking her reverie. "Not just because of what you did, but because of how you survived, how you carried on, and how you've reclaimed your life despite everything." Evelyn allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. She had spent years perfecting invisibility as a survival mechanism, yet she now realized that acknowledgement didn't diminish her strength, it validated it. Every life she had saved, every decision she had made under impossible pressure, every moment of courage, now had recognition beyond her private memory. The snow thickened and passers-by hurried along, their faces reflecting festive lights. Evelyn noticed the patch on her jacket catching the illumination, and for a fleeting moment she felt the presence of her past mission in a new light. The patch was no longer just a relic of survival, it was proof of courage, endurance, and heroism finally acknowledged. "Do you think people will understand?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. "Even those who doubted me." Marcus considered this. "Not everyone will," he admitted. "There will always be skeptics, always those who question. But what matters is that you know the truth, and those who understand will matter far more than those who don't." Evelyn nodded slowly. She had spent years weighed down by the opinions of strangers, the lack of acknowledgement, the feeling of being forgotten. Yet she realized now that recognition wasn't about universal approval. It was about truth, validation, and reclaiming the narrative of her own life. As they walked through the plaza, the wind swirling snowflakes around them, Evelyn felt an unexpected lightness. The burden of isolation, the weight of secrecy, the doubts and fears that had haunted her, they seemed lighter, more manageable. She was not just a survivor of a mission, but a woman reclaiming her life, her identity, and her voice. That evening, they returned to the bus terminal, the place that had been both refuge and symbol of her invisibility. Evelyn paused at the corner where she had sat countless times, coffee in hand, watching the world move past. She traced the patch on her jacket gently, a small gesture of acknowledgement and gratitude to herself. This symbol of past heroism had carried her through danger and invisibility. Now, it marked a new chapter: recognition, connection, and closure. Marcus watched her quietly, sensing the magnitude of the moment. "You've come a long way," he said softly, "and there's still more ahead if you want it. But tonight, you've reclaimed yourself." Evelyn took a deep breath, letting the winter air fill her lungs. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel pride, not the fleeting pride of survival, but the deeper pride of acknowledgement, of reclaiming agency over her own story. She had faced ridicule, skepticism, and isolation, yet she had endured, thrived, and finally been seen. A gentle snowflake landed on her jacket, catching on the edge of the patch. She smiled faintly, imagining it as a quiet applause from the universe, a small recognition of her courage, resilience, and unyielding spirit. That night, Evelyn returned to her modest apartment, the glow of the city reflecting in her windows. She carefully hung her jacket, the patch facing outward, a small emblem of triumph and validation. For years, she had hidden, endured, and survived. Tonight, she allowed herself to celebrate, quietly but meaningfully. Recognition did not erase the past, nor did it undo the pain, but it provided a bridge from invisibility to acknowledgement, from isolation to connection. Marcus knocked lightly and entered, carrying 2 cups of tea. He placed one beside her on the table, his presence a steady reassurance. "To new beginnings," he said simply, raising his cup. Evelyn met his gaze, the faintest spark of warmth and gratitude in her eyes. "To new beginnings," she echoed. She had survived impossible missions, faced skepticism, endured isolation, and now stood on the threshold of a life where her courage and heroism were recognized and valued. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. Hope for connection, for understanding, for a life that balanced survival with acknowledgement. The patch on her jacket, once a silent reminder of sacrifice, now symbolized triumph, of endurance, courage, and the reclamation of her identity. Evelyn Brooks, once mocked, dismissed, and invisible, had emerged from the shadows. She had faced doubt, isolation, and her own internal scars. And tonight, on the cusp of winter's quiet embrace, she was finally seen, truly seen. The snow continued to fall softly outside, a silent celebration of survival and recognition. Inside, Evelyn sipped her tea, her heart lighter, her mind calmer. She had reclaimed her story, embraced her courage, and stepped into a life where acknowledgement, trust, and hope could finally coexist with her strength. And in that quiet victory, the Christmas Eve patch on her jacket gleamed with meaning, a symbol of triumph, resilience, and the unbroken spirit of a hero finally recognized.